The Epstein files were supposed to stay buried forever. Powerful men relied on that silence. Careers depended on it. Entire reputations were constructed on the assumption that certain documents would never see daylight. Smiling photographs, royal charity events, carefully staged public appearances, all of it resting on the quiet belief that the past would remain locked away. But history has a habit of breaking locks. And when the Department of Justice began unsealing a wave of Jeffrey Epstein-related records in early 2024, the shock did not simply rattle political circles in Washington or the financial elites of Wall Street. It shot across the Atlantic and detonated directly inside the already fragile reputation of the British royal family. For years, the public believed the Epstein scandal had one clear royal villain, Prince Andrew. Cameras followed him relentlessly, commentators dissected every appearance, and the narrative seemed settled. But the newly examined documents forced a far more uncomfortable question. Because the story did not stop with Andrew. Instead, it pointed towards someone else entirely. Toward a woman who had spent decades drifting between scandal and sympathy. Towards Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, known to the world as Fergie. And what those documents appeared to reveal about her relationship with Epstein sent a chill through royal insiders who believed they had already seen the worst of this saga. To understand why these revelations landed with such force, you have to step back into the chaotic life Ferguson had been living long before Epstein's name became a global symbol of corruption and exploitation. Fergie entered the royal spotlight in 1986 when she married Prince Andrew. At first, she was seen as a breath of fresh air, vibrant, emotional, spontaneous in a royal institution that traditionally valued restraint above everything else. But that very energy soon became a problem. She laughed loudly, spoke freely, and behaved with a kind of unfiltered honesty that palace officials found impossible to manage. The British tabloids were fascinated by her. They celebrated her warmth one week and mocked her the next. The cycle of adoration and humiliation became relentless. And when her marriage to Andrew collapsed and the divorce was finalized in 1996, Ferguson was suddenly outside the protective financial structure of the monarchy. She kept the title Duchess of York, but lost the royal salary and institutional support that came with being a working member of the family. What followed was a long and very public struggle with money. Debts piled up, business ventures collapsed. Publishing deals and television appearances brought income, but rarely enough to keep up with the expensive lifestyle associated with royal circles. Over time, Ferguson developed a reputation as someone constantly searching for financial lifelines, and it was during that vulnerable period that Jeffrey Epstein entered her world. Before examining what the documents say about their relationship, pause for a moment and consider the timeline that makes this story so deeply unsettling. Jeffrey Epstein was convicted in 2008 for soliciting prostitution from a minor. The conviction was not hidden or ambiguous. It was widely reported across the world. His crimes were known, documented, and legally confirmed. Most people would instinctively distance themselves from someone with that record. Yet the correspondence uncovered in the Epstein files suggests that Sarah Ferguson moved in the opposite direction. Emails attributed to her described Epstein in astonishingly affectionate language. In one message, she reportedly expressed deep gratitude for his generosity and kindness, writing words that immediately triggered outrage when they surfaced publicly. "I am at your service." Those words were not written in ignorance of his crimes. They were written after the conviction, after the guilty plea, after the world knew exactly what Epstein had done. And they were not isolated. In another email dated August 3, 2009, Ferguson reportedly described Epstein as the brother she had always wished for. In other exchanges, she called him a spectacular and special friend, even referring to him as a legend. Imagine reading those words knowing the man they were directed toward had already been convicted of exploiting a minor. The reaction among commentators was immediate and fierce. Was this blind loyalty, emotional dependence, or something far more transactional rooted in money and influence? That question becomes harder to ignore when financial details start appearing in the record. For years, reports circulated about Ferguson's ongoing debts and financial instability. Epstein, by contrast, appeared to have unlimited resources. In one recorded conversation that drew significant media attention, a payment of $500,000 was discussed, with reference to a deposit being held in a safe. The implication was difficult to miss. A struggling duchess maintaining an intimate friendship with an immensely wealthy man whose generosity seemed to arrive at exactly the moments she needed it most. Whether that relationship was driven by affection, desperation, or financial survival remains fiercely debated. But the pattern of communication revealed in the emails painted a picture that many observers found troubling. A woman emotionally and financially entangled with a convicted sex offender long after his crimes were known. Yet, even that disturbing connection was not the detail that truly shook royal circles. Because the story did not remain confined to Ferguson herself, the documents pointed toward two other names that had until then managed to stay largely outside the shadow of their parents' scandals. Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie. The daughters of Andrew and Ferguson had spent years building relatively perfectly respectable public identities. They were not working royals in the traditional sense, but they were widely seen as grounded figures trying to navigate life within a complicated family legacy. Eugenie, in particular, had earned respect for her advocacy around modern slavery awareness. That context makes what the timeline reveals almost unbearably ironic. Jeffrey Epstein was released from prison in July 2009 after serving his sentence for the 2008 conviction. His release was not quiet. It was widely reported and widely criticized. The details of his crimes were public knowledge. 5 days after Epstein walked out of that prison, Sarah Ferguson traveled to Miami to visit him. She did not travel alone. She brought her daughters with her. Princess Beatrice was 19 at the time. Princess Eugenie was 17. According to an email from one of Epstein's aides dated July 24th of that year, the trip was arranged and confirmed. Ferguson herself later acknowledged traveling to Miami during that period with her daughters. The travel expenses, according to reports connected to the documents, were covered by Epstein. Think about the sequence carefully. 5 days after a man leaves prison for a crime involving the exploitation of a minor, a mother brings her teenage daughters to visit him in Miami. The trip is funded by that same man. When those facts began circulating publicly, the reaction was immediate disbelief. Commentators kept returning to a single haunting question. What kind of judgment leads a parent to make that decision? And what makes the Miami visit even more unsettling is that the documents suggest it was not a one-time lapse in judgment. Instead, it appears to have been part of an ongoing pattern. Emails referenced requests from Epstein involving Ferguson's daughters, requests that were sometimes treated with startling casualness. In one message dated March 2010, Epstein reportedly asked whether one of the daughters could provide him with a private tour of Buckingham Palace. The palace, of course, is not a tourist attraction available for private bookings. It is the official residence of the British monarch and one of the most tightly controlled locations in the United Kingdom. Yet Ferguson's reported response to the request was 2 words, of course. For many readers, those 2 words became symbolic of something larger, a sense that Epstein's access to this royal circle had become normalized. Another message showed Ferguson apologizing to Epstein when her daughters were unavailable to see him during a particular weekend. One had been in France, the other out with friends. The tone of the apology struck observers as almost routine, as though Epstein regularly expected access to the young women and was being informed about a scheduling conflict. Taken individually, each email might be explained away, but together they began to form a pattern that critics described as deeply troubling. Epstein attending Beatrice's 18th birthday celebration only intensified that perception. When photographs from the party resurfaced with Epstein visible among the guests, public reaction was explosive. The idea that a convicted offender had been present at such a personal family celebration left many people asking whether the boundaries that normally protect young members of a family had simply disappeared inside this strange relationship. By the time the full scope of the correspondence became public, the scandal had moved far beyond gossip. It was no longer just a story about poor judgment or embarrassing friendships. It had become a story about power, access, and the uncomfortable possibility that Epstein's influence had penetrated far deeper into royal social circles than anyone had previously admitted. For Buckingham Palace, the situation created a nightmare scenario. The monarchy survives largely on symbolism and public trust. Stories suggesting that a convicted offender might have been granted special access to royal spaces, including the possibility of a private tour of Buckingham Palace, threatened that carefully cultivated image. Yet the palace responded in the way it traditionally does when scandals erupt: silence. No detailed statement. No public explanation. The strategy appeared to be the same one used in previous crises. Wait, maintain distance, and hope the media cycle eventually moves on. But the Epstein story has proven remarkably resistant to fading away. Legal processes connected to the wider Epstein network continue in the United States, and new documents still emerge periodically. And at the center of all these questions remain 2 figures who have rarely spoken publicly about the situation: Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. They were present during key moments described in the files. They were in Miami shortly after Epstein's release. They attended the birthday celebration where Epstein appeared among the guests. Their names appear repeatedly in emails discussing meetings, invitations, and social arrangements. Now adults with families of their own, they face a difficult reality. The world continues to speculate about what they witnessed, what they understood at the time, and how they interpret those experiences today. Whether they will ever choose to speak openly about it remains unknown. For now, the Epstein files leave behind a complicated and deeply uncomfortable record. Emails exist, dates exist, trips, dinners, and meetings are documented. Some allegations remain unproven, but many events themselves are not in dispute. They form a timeline that continues to cast a shadow over one of the world's most famous royal families. And perhaps the most haunting element of the entire story is that its final chapter has not yet been written. Documents continue to surface, investigations continue, and somewhere within those records may still lie pieces of a story that the public has not yet fully seen.